The past few years have seen a surge in classic FPS games making their way back into the spotlight. Whether it's the excellent Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal, slightly different titles like the Shadow Warrior reboot, or the entirety of New Blood's game lineup with titles like Dusk and Medieval, as well as the recently released Ultra Kill. From out of nowhere earlier this year, yet another indie classic FPS was revealed, but this one was different. This one is a rhythm game. Developer Awe Interactive has brought us BPM, bullets per minute, an FPS roguelite with one main mechanic: you have to shoot on the beat. Taking from similar games like Crypt of the Necrodancer, BPM forces you onto the rhythm to perform actions like attacking, dashing, and using abilities. Combined with some roguelite elements and a brutally saturated art style, the game stood out and gained some attention online for having an extremely appealing gimmick. Now that the game is out and we've gotten to see what the game is like in motion, it's time to see if this game can keep up with the pulse-pounding pace it's been touting. Let's start off right away with the gameplay gimmick. The rhythmic shooting feels absolutely perfect. You can tell right away that the game started out as only this and was fleshed out after they absolutely perfected the mechanic. Shooting to the beat feels great, and the songs are written well enough that when you empty a magazine into an enemy perfectly in time with the hook, you can't help but get a little bit excited every time. Some of the guns play with this mechanic in interesting ways as well. A good example of this is reloading. In addition to shooting on the beat, you're also required to reload on the beat, and each gun has a different number of actions required to reload the gun. Take the revolver, for instance. It's technically one of the starting guns, as one of the characters in the roster is able to start with it, but it certainly seems to do the most damage. The downside to this, however, is that you have to reload every single round in the chamber one by one. This means you're constantly juggling between reloading a few rounds, then firing before going back to reloading. It creates this dance that flows really well between reloading and shooting. For me, the rhythm shooting gimmick was the reason I picked the game up, and I can safely say it delivers. As such, the main aspect we'll be talking about is actually the roguelite elements. Beyond the shooting mechanics, the core of the game is the roguelite aspect, and since lots of things are handled by algorithms and random generation, we need to discuss the balance of the game itself. After all, the gunplay can only carry the game so far. First off, the equipment of the game is handled as 4 different equipment pieces as well as a gun, rather than straight upgrades to your stats or changes to your gameplay a la Binding of Isaac. This means the focus of the game is based around picking between items that work together well, and creating something of a competent build, while picking up stat upgrades along the way. I don't mind this approach generally speaking. There are many fun and interesting items to grab, like an item that allows you to deal more damage for staying on the beat, an item that fires flares from you every time you shoot, and an item that straight up gives you infinite jumps. There's a lot of fun stuff here, and most of it's enjoyable to use. While I feel like maintaining and getting a decent amount of damage scales pretty well into the game, barring maybe toward the end, which we'll talk about later, we start to run into issues when we talk about survivability and items and upgrades that improve or don't improve that aspect of gameplay. Dying fast is never fun. Taking damage off-screen from enemies is even less fun. The biggest problem I have with this game is how they've balanced health. On the default character, you start with 100 health segmented into 4 sections. Realistically speaking, these sections are the number of hits you can take. A big problem you'll run into early on in your runs before you have any money is that you really don't have any way to heal unless you get lucky with health drops from the chests that spawn after clearing a room. This can be a problem when combined with the fact that you have almost no invulnerability time after taking hits. When dealing with enemies like bats or big open rooms where enemies can get behind you, it's pretty easy to get tagged in a room at least once, or in a worst case get quickly blasted all the way down to 0 and your run's over. In that way, it can be very unforgiving. This carries pretty far into the game as well. Even in a late game run, in a room full of enemies that could shoot you from off screen when you're not looking at them, or some boss type enemies whose attacks are particularly nasty when paired together, you can be dead within a few seconds. I don't have a problem with this inherently, especially in a game that has difficulties, but the issue is that all of these problems are present on the easy difficulty, let alone the hard difficulty. In addition, on the flip side of these balance problems, as soon as you have healing of some kind, the game becomes broken in the completely opposite direction. Healing is insanely overpowered in this game, and due to the punishing nature of the amount of damage you take, can feel almost necessary at times. In my time with the game, I never won once when I didn't have healing, but I won every time when I did have it. Whether it was the extremely overpowered heal spell, or health steal on damage dealt items, healing is completely OP. This leads to most runs of the game having one of two feelings. You're either a glass cannon dealing tons of damage in lieu of healing items, with 0 survivability other than your dash, or you're an unkillable monster that can stand still in a room and heal yourself back to full every time for no cost. Plus, in my experience, usually once you've made it to the last set of stages, the amount of stat ups and gear you have make you way too strong for the final boss anyway, even on hard mode. For me, what would often happen is that if I didn't get a heal item within the first 1 to 3 floors, I would inevitably die on the 5th through 7th floor when I get put in a room that's jammed full of bats and enemies that can target me directly. Trying to manage enemies that are all over the room while also paying attention to the telegraphed attacks mapped to the reticle starts to feel like a futile effort when you start to take damage while still trying to pay attention to everything. Sometimes the graphics of the game don't help it either. The game has an extremely dense, saturated color tone that changes between the zones of the game. It's very standout, and there are aspects of the game that look great with it. The heavy contrast doesn't necessarily bother me, but I do wish they had a bit more diversity in the color of the zones. When everything is the same color, sometimes shots can blend into the background and lead to you getting hit more. It's not to say that this balance makes the game completely unfun to play either. The power game throughout the run feels good, and it can be fun to combine the items in a way that creates an extremely strong build. Tons of crit damage, infinite explosive shots with the minigun, or flying around a room raining down hell with the solar flares item is really fun, and I think the item interactions are built well. Overall, my thoughts on the roguelite balance are the game feels difficult without healing, but way too easy with healing. I think they need to not only nerf healing, but also nerf the enemies that are doing too much damage that make builds not running any healing way too hard to deal with. Either that, or they need to consider potentially modifying drop rates or changing how healing and health work. The heal spell in particular is a big offender of this. It was literally the only E ability I ran into in the whole game that could recharge without clearing rooms, and it literally allowed me to heal to full after every single room. I had a few other loose complaints written down, like enemies not visually correlating with their threat, but that might have just been my bat PTSD speaking. And they've gone and nerfed the bats a bit on easy mode in the past few days, so hopefully that issue is resolved. The balance of health is really my main concern, though they may also want to adjust boss health scaling somehow, because almost every time I've made it to the final boss on easy or hard, I've been able to melt it extremely fast. It almost seems as by the time you've made it to the last stage, you're nearly guaranteed to win, since you most likely have a build that allows you to sustain some level of damage. Overall though, the game has tons of charm. The music is great, feeling like a slightly more metal Binding of Isaac type soundtrack rather than something like Doom. The guns are almost all fun to use, and as far as I can tell are all viable, allowing players to pick what gun they enjoy using most. And little touches like being able to finish the boss off at your own pace with no music forcing your shot speed is a really neat addition. They really knew the novelty of the gameplay gimmick they had on their hands, and I would say from that perspective they absolutely nailed it. So should you play this game? Maybe. You should maybe play this. If you're a fan of classic FPS and are looking for something to shake it up, this game will do that for you and give you a good chunk of entertainment in the process. However, if you're not interested in the rhythm aspects or aren't confident in your ability to keep a beat with gameplay, you might have trouble with this. The game punishes you hard for not being able to keep a beat, so if you think that would affect your ability to play, this one might be a skip. In addition, if roguelite isn't your thing either and you prefer a linear game, this probably won't scratch that itch, no matter how good the gameplay is. But if neither of those things bother you, then I would definitely say to pick it up if it sounds fun. The gimmick makes it overall enjoyable a good majority of the time, and if you're willing to put up with some slightly off-balance game design, the game is tons of fun to play and explore. Thanks for watching. Check out my Twitter and my Twitch, links are in the description below. You can also check out my Patreon if you want to support my content. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.